Welcome to another monthly Procreate project. This time we are going to be doing a layered inner shadow style. We'll be making the word you together, and I'll show you some examples of what you can do with that. But on the blog, there is this reference sheet you can refer to. It lists out the brushes that I am using. You don't have to use the exact ones, but if you want to, they're there for you. And the color palette is on the blog as a downloadable Procreate format as well, just to make it easy because we are using quite a few colors. Mine shows untitled, but I labeled yours layered inner shadow style. So that's what we're using. So here's a close-up of that layered inner shadow style. We'll be using a lot of layers, and you could do something like this and make it love you. Since it's Valentine's Day this month, you could put hey you and make it a cute little card. You could put be you and make it a motivational piece of artwork. Some other things that I have done recently with this style are this ISBN thinking about you piece. This was a book pun that was part of my bookish lettering challenge that goes out each week in my happy emails. And more recently, I did this hope piece with some florals and the same texture we're going to use today, that velvety texture. Alternatively, here's just a look at another color palette using the same style. So lots of textures. It looks a little complicated, but it's actually quite easy. It's just about having lots of layers. So we will get into it. And so just make yourself a new canvas. We'll sketch out the letters for the word you, and we'll get started. So the first step is just to sketch out our basic U letters. I have a square canvas. Mine is 2000 by 2000 and set to 300 DPI. So I've got my layer. I'm going to rename this, just tap it and rename it and call this my sketch layer. So if you want to use a similar style, feel free. If you want to change it a little bit, it might be easiest for you to make it kind of exact just because we are going to be layering it. And it might be easier for you to follow along if you keep it very similar to what I am doing here. So I am just going to use a basic monoline brush. You can use any monoline brush in your arsenal. And I'm just going to make it a smallish size. So if I test it out here, that's a pretty good size. Maybe I'll make it a little smaller so I can get some better details. So for the letter Y, what I would usually do for this is I want to keep two arcs about the same. So if you put your pen down and draw an arc and then hold it, it makes kind of a perfect arc. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. And then because I want to use this in several different places, I might either copy and paste that all across, or because these letters, the Y and the U especially, are very symmetrical, what I would do is just draw a straight line here. So if you hold your pen down, you can get that nice straight line, and then I'll connect that arc, two finger tap to undo if you need to, and then I'll do the same thing here. And then instead of doing that on the other side, I'll swipe left, click duplicate, tap my arrow, tap flip horizontal, and then just slide that into place, which keeps it nice and symmetrical. So again, I will tap and merge that down. And now I'm going to do the bottom half, and I want to be able to duplicate that as well. So I'm going to add a new layer just for a moment. I'm going to draw my arc, and then I'll draw my straight line, and then connect the two using another arc. Maybe smooth out that line a little. Okay, so again, we will swipe left, duplicate, tap your arrow tool, flip horizontal, and slide it into place. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and pinch those layers together to merge them and drag and drop my color. So I have got my letter Y, and then once it's filled in, you can see if there's any areas you need to smooth out. So that to me needs a little smoothing, and same on that side. All right, now let's move on to our O. I love O's, they're super easy. I'm gonna do it on a new layer just so I can adjust it if I need to. So I'll draw an O shape and then hold, and then I can move it up and down to get it the size I want. And then same thing with the inner one. And if I need to shift that over, I'll grab my selection tool over here and make sure it's on freehand, and then I'll just circle that shape, grab my arrow tool and shift it more into center, and drag and drop. So nice and easy for the O, but because it's on its own layer, I could shift it around easily, space it out a little more. For this version of lettering, I kept my letters really close together, but you could certainly shift them farther apart and it would not affect how you do this tutorial. So for letter U, again, we have a pretty symmetrical design. So I will do one side and then duplicate and go over to the other. So let's see if I can just swoop this in one. I think I'll do a straight line here and then I'll connect it. And then I'll start a little higher just so I can swoop it a little more and it looks more natural. Same thing over here, straight line, smooth it out over here, and then go about halfway. Now we can swipe left, duplicate, use our arrow tool, flip horizontal, and then slide that one into place as well. If you want to adjust the angle a little, you can. And now I will merge those down and I'm going to fill the color, and then that helps me see better that, oops, didn't mean to undo that I need to smooth out the base here. So I'll just smooth that out. And I can see I had a little overlap here. Oops. So just smooth out anything that you notice didn't fill in, like this I need to fill a little and this I need to erase a little. So now we've got our U all drawn out, and I think my Y looks a little too close. So I'm gonna just shift it over a tiny bit. We can turn off our sketch layer now that we're done, and maybe you can see better if you want to space them out a little more, and just do what looks best visually. So I think that's good. So we've got our main letters down, so we can go ahead and merge those down. We'll rename this U1 because we are going to have a second variation to create that layered style. So for now, you can delete your sketch, you have your U, and we will move on to our next step. So I have just colored in the letters for our first U with that blue right there. So now we're gonna tap the darker blue next to it. We're gonna swipe left, duplicate that layer, and rename this U2 because we are going to have two different variations of this. So now you wanna drag and drop that darker color. And as you can see in the layered inner shadow, we've got this section right here and this. So the bottom one is our U1 and this is our U2. So we need to erase part of that layer. So what I do is usually just take a large monoline brush and I just eyeball it, but I erase about halfway up and try to keep it nice and level. Eyeballing it works totally fine though. And then I just erase out all the extras at the top. So now we need to add that little detail on that layer. So temporarily, let's add a new layer using that same color and a smaller size brush. What we are going to do is create that little detail. So I usually come about halfway on the letter, and make my brush even smaller, and create an arc shape. And then I just bring that arc shape down into my letter. Something like that. If you want to adjust it a little, bring it higher, and oop, didn't mean to fill it in yet. You got to close out your shape at the bottom there, so draw a line, then you can fill it in. And then I also make another arc kind of right here. And then make sure that shape is closed at the bottom and then fill that in. And because we're gonna be using this multiple times, that's why we have it on its own layer, because now we can just click duplicate, bring that over to this one. Sometimes you need to zoom in to get it to line up properly. And then we will do it one more time for the U. And then go ahead and just pinch all those layers down. So U2 is all on that one layer. Now we're gonna work on adding those inner shadows and some outline work. our outlines are gonna be white, so why don't we change our background color? So add a new layer, tap, hold, drag it to the bottom, and rename background. Now, I know there is a background function built in, but if you've watched my other videos, you know that I like to make my own layer for background because it gives me a little more control and makes things easier to change. So we're gonna take that really light purple and drag and drop our background, and now we'll be able to see our outline a lot easier. So come back down to U1. You are going to swipe left, duplicate, and below it, tap the bottom layer. And U1, you're gonna keep that the same, but you're gonna rename it outline. And now we're gonna grab white, or you can even use this. This is like a ever so slightly purple color, super light. And you're gonna drag and drop that to each letter. You can't see it because it's below this layer, but it is there. So now with your U outline selected, you're gonna grab the magic wand tool and you're gonna click Gaussian blur, and we're gonna go to 3%. And you wanna remember that number because we're gonna use that again when we do that on layer 2. So to make that more visible, we just need to duplicate that layer a bunch of times. And you can see each time I duplicate the layer, it's becoming more and more opaque. So I'll usually do that quite a few times until it gets nice and opaque, sometimes even up to like 20 times. There's another way to do this, but this is the one I use most now just because it's fastest. And then pinch them all together or tap merge down. I might do it just a couple more times. Now I've done this with the 3%, I've done it with 1%. You can also click select, tap your layer fill, and do it that way. So if you notice you have any wonky edges, tap select and fill a few times and it makes it a cleaner edge. Sometimes I'll do this with just a 1 or 2% and you get this really skinny outline, which looks pretty cool too. Now we need to create that inner shadow style, still using layer 1. So let's do this super light blue. We're going to duplicate our layer 1 again. And now we're going to drag that lighter blue color over and we want to shift it, and you can see it all over. We don't want that to happen. So all you have to do is tap this and click clipping mask, and now it becomes an inner shadow. So our original layer is actually the inner shadow, and this one becomes our main lettering. So I'm just gonna eyeball that about there, I think. And you can rename this one U1 Inner Shadow. And to make this look right, we have to do a little modification. So you grab a small monoline brush or adjust the size of the one that you're using, and we need to do some erasing. So you can see that this doesn't look quite right because we need to connect these lines with an eraser tool. So when we've done extrusions in the past, we do the opposite of this. We add lines. This time we're actually taking them away. So I would erase there and there. You're basically just connecting the corner of this one to the corner of the white. I think if it's the first time you do it, that seems a little confusing. But the more you'll do it, the more sense it makes. You don't really have to do much with the O. You can kind of just add a tiny little smooth out right here. And then with the U, we'll do the same thing. So that would actually get connected here. So that does get filled in just a little. And it kind of depends on the angle at which you've done your inner shadow too. We'll add some additional shadows to this to make it pop even more, but for now, we'll stop right there and we'll do the same thing on our upper layer. So swipe left, duplicate your U2 layer and rename this one U2 outline. And again, we'll use that almost white purpley color, and you're gonna fill in the bottom ones this time. And again, I asked you to remember that 3% because we are going to again tap our magic wand tool, Gaussian blur, and go right to 3%. Now we'll duplicate this a bunch of times just like last time. Pinch it all together. Duplicate a bunch more. Now, this may seem a little tedious sometimes, but it is more consistent than going around and doing this manually. So again, I'm gonna do that last step of tapping select, fill layer, select, fill layer, just to make it nice and opaque. That looks pretty good. And you can see how it matches up with our top layer now. So now we need to create an inner shadow with this layer, just like we did with layer 1. So let's duplicate your top layer, U2, and we'll rename that U2 inner shadow. And we want this one to be slightly lighter than our current color. So let's do this color. We can always adjust it later if we want to. So we will fill that there. And now we need to tap it and hit clipping mask. And then I'm going to eyeball it to bring it to be the same. You can kind of see, like, if I put it here, it's much skinnier than that one. If I bring it about there, it's about the same width. So it looks like a nice continuation of our top one. So that's all we're going for. And you're just gonna eyeball that. And now we need to do the same thing with erasing this one. So I will connect those two lines. Make sure that's nice and rounded. And then at the bottom here, you would connect that just a little bit. Same thing on the O. And then at the bottom of the Y, right there, erase. This would be just a little connection here from the edge of that to the edge of that. And that's pretty much it. So now we have all our inner shadows and outlines placed, and we are going to do a nice extrusion and a shadow, and then just some extra little details to really make it come to life. To create our extrusion, we'll take the outline version of you, we will duplicate it, and let's rename this extrusion. And that is gonna be the element that makes it look like it's popping off the page. So I am going to use, I think I will use this purple right here. So I'm just gonna drag and drop that over. Again, you can't see it because it's behind. So there's two ways we can do an extrusion. We can do it ourselves manually and then connect the corners, or if you want to do it quick, you can tap the magic wand tool, click motion blur, and then drag your pencil to the edge of the page. And then it's kind of light, so you have to go through and do that duplicate a ton of time to get it more opaque. You can see every time I do that, it gets more opaque. So that's the quick method. And it works pretty well for everything. I do manual sometimes just because you have a little more control in seeing where it gets placed. And then you can, whoop, 2-finger tap to undo. I wanna zoom in and make sure I have that nice and aligned. And I'm gonna duplicate even more, make it nice and solid. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And now we also wanna do a shadow. So duplicate that layer one more time, tap the bottom one, rename that shadow. And this time I'm gonna pretend my sun is up here in this left corner. So I'm gonna have my shadow go the same way. So I'm gonna tap motion blur again, and I'm going to go, I'm at like 27%, 28%, and I'll drag that into place. If you feel like that's too much shadow, you can 2-finger tap to undo, and then come back to that motion blur and maybe go to like 22%. That's a little more subtle. And then you can tap the N on that layer. You can try some other options, like linear burn looks really good. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna lighten it a lot. We want it to be pretty subtle. So I'm gonna go about 14% there. And then you can see if I toggle that off and on, it really, you can see where it pops more. Now let's add a little bit of shading to our extrusion to really make this look even more realistic. So add a new layer above it, and you can call it just shading. Since it's above extrusion, you'll probably know. If you want to call it extrusion shading, you could too. I am going to do a clipping mask on this so it confines it. Actually, I'll show you without the clipping mask and then we'll apply it. So I need a darker purple. Yep, that's darker purple. And again, the sun is coming this way, so you want to think about where your shadows would be. You'd have a little down here. You'd have a little under here. Usually on the underside of letters you have a little, or underside. And then usually on the bottoms here. And then we're going to use a gradient brush to kind of smooth it out a little too. So don't worry too much about that. And let's see if our sun's there. About there. This one I'll bring right up to that edge. A little there, a little here, and a little there. And now if I apply that clipping mask, you can see how it confines itself to just my letters. Now I'm gonna take a gradient brush. You'll probably have lots of those in your kit or ones that are built in. You could do something like the spray paints. I usually use the gradient color from my creative lettering kit, which is one of my really old ones, but that's what I still go back to usually when I'm doing this. And then I just kind of tap it in to blend it out. Just some gentle circles. Sometimes if you make it a little bigger, it's easier to get it to be more subtle. And then I'll just blend out all those hard lines. Almost all. The top I don't blend out quite as much. And you could always do, if you like a hard shadow, it's fine to leave that too. So for this, I'll make it a little smaller because it's a little more precise. Just kind of tap that in. And you want a little bit of lighter color there because that has, you know, I think a little bit of sun would be hitting right there. All right, so now we've kind of smoothed all those out. And if you still think it's a little, maybe a little right there, too bold, what I like to do then is tap my end layer again. Sometimes I'll play with the linear burn options or color burn, and then I just make it a little more subtle. If you go normal, that's fine too. You just probably wouldn't reduce it as much. I think I like color burn on this one. So you just want it enough that you can tell that it's, you know, 3D without being excessive. So if I turn that off and on, it helps you see that a little more. And it's always easier to see in person than on screen. So you want to exaggerate it enough that it's noticeable, but not so much that it's not realistic looking. So now we want to add just a little detail to our main lettering layer to just really help the inner shadows pop. So when I do this, I like to use my speckled shader brush, which is from my texture kit one. I use this a ton, and we are going to do it on the inner shadow layers. So to do this, the easiest way is to tap it and click alpha lock so we can only color on that layer. And for this one, I want to use that inner shadow color. So I just hit this little box and I can drag it to whatever color I've used in the past, and I want to use that. So anywhere there's a shadow, I just kind of want to bring in. So I'm only going along where there's already that color. Does that make sense? So on this one, again, I'll bring it in just along where that color is. And this is just going to add a little more dimension. And we'll do that on the bottom layer too, but first we also want to add a few highlights, and we're already on that layer. So what I'm going to do is grab this white color, and you could either use this same brush and then do the areas you haven't done already, or you could go back and use that gradient brush and do it that way. I love adding the texture, so I'm going to use the same speckled shader brush and add my highlights that way. There'd be a little there. Oop, 2-finger tap to undo. And then there. So now we need to do that to our same layer down here. So come up to your inner shadow for your level 2. And again, we're gonna click alpha lock so we can only color on those letters. And again, I'll use my selection tool's been weird the last couple days. Like, it doesn't wanna pop up for me sometimes. If that happens, just go grab it from your color palette. So I think that color, yeah. So I'll just, again, use that color right along where I was using it. along the inner shadow. So I do that for the whole thing. And then again, I would add the highlights with that lighter color. So there, tiny bit there. So now you've got just, can you see how that just pops even a little bit more? Lovely. So now we are going to add just a few simple details and then add our overall texture and we'll be all done. For my little dot details, you could either just use a basic monoline brush and make your dots. I like, again, like I mentioned, texture. So from my creativity kit, there's the creativity kit. I have got all these fun little stamps that have texture. And I created those by stamping things on paper and then scanning them in and using them to make the stamps. So they're real textures. So here I'm just gonna add a new layer at the top and call this dots. And again, that just keeps it easy for me to edit and adjust. And I'll just tap in 3 dots on each. The nice part about using a stamp too is that it keeps your dots consistent. And if you want them to be a little bit brighter, all you have to do is duplicate once. Can you see how that makes it brighter? And then I'll just merge that down. And if you need to edit, if you notice, oh, my dot's a little bit off, you can grab the magic wand tool, circle that dot, and then just kind of tap it into place. Or if you notice this one's not quite centered between two, you can just manually adjust those a wee bit. And in my original piece that I showed you with the LoveU, I had just shifted everything down and then added my calligraphy and then used some of the creativity kit stamps to add some little details and that little heart in the U. So if you need to do that when you're gonna shift things, all you do is select everything by swiping right until everything is highlighted, and then you can move that around. So you could move it down here and add a word above if you were doing that. I'm gonna leave mine centered for now. And all we really need to do is add our velvet texture. So all the way at the top here, I am going to rename this texture. And then for my texture kit 2, I use the D&D velvet texture. And you could use a darker purple, or you can even use the same purple and apply a color burn. So if I did it right now, you can't see it except for on the letters. If I apply color burn by tapping the N, that doesn't show as much either. What if I do linear burn? Nope. All right, so let's just tap clear if we've tried anything on that and change it back to normal. We'll just use a darker purple. So I'll use that color purple, I think. And now you can see, now the key with using a texture is you do not want to lift your pencil off the page. If I lift my pencil, then I get, inconsistency. So I want to put my pencil down, hold it down, and don't lift it up until I'm totally done coloring. See, I missed a spot there, but as long as I haven't picked my pencil up, I can go back and edit it. So now, sometimes it's easier to do it first and then play with these options. So a lot of times what looks nice is multiply because it's pretty subtle, but sometimes I play with the different options to see what looks nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and go for multiply, but you usually wanna make it a lot more subtle. So you can adjust it to maybe 22% there, and then I still have that nice texture without it being overwhelming. And you can even add extra textures. More textures, the better. One I really love that I use a ton in my pieces is by Shout Bam. I don't know if any of you follow Jimbo on Instagram, but he has this rough and raw set. And let's see, that one and the dirty halftones have some really cool textures. But I think the rough and raw halftone, there we go. I love that one and I use it a ton. So for this, let's maybe try, we'll use dark purple again. So I'll add a new layer and rename this one halftone texture. And this is like a distressed halftone, so it looks really fun. So you can see it's pretty subtle, or pretty unsubtle, but we can make it more subtle. So again, you can try multiply, you can try some different options. Normal works just as well as anything here. So then I'll just change that again and make it a lot more subtle. And if you don't like how it looks on your letters, then sometimes what I'll do is I'll just tap the layer and click clear and try a different color. So maybe the blue would look better overlaid. So you can try different things and play with the different options and see what you like best. So for that one, I like screen. Screen looks just kind of like almost white, but still adds that extra texture. So I'll put that like really subtle, like maybe 10% even, but you can still see, like if I zoom in here and toggle it on and off, it's still doing something. So it's still adding another element to my lettering. And then if you wanted to do that stamp that I had in the middle, you could either just draw a heart, or I use this Creativity Kit stamped heart right here. And again, I would always do another layer, name it heart. And I use kind of this mauve-y color. And it's okay if you stamp it and it's too big, you can just use the arrow tool and shrink it down to size. And then you've got your fun layered inner shadow lettering piece. So the reason I'm not showing you anything beyond this is because I really want you to be able to use your own creativity with what you choose to do outside of this exact lettering, what word you choose to add, what colors, maybe what stamps and details you choose to add. So tag me at @ByDawnNicole on Instagram. I would love to see what you create. And I hope this tutorial has made the inner shadow seem less daunting to you. The first few times it's a little bit of a mind-boggling thing when you're doing the erasing some things, but you will get it down the more you do it. And if you like dimensional styles, check out my dimensional lettering class where I teach you 9 different dimensional lettering styles. They're all very beginner friendly. This was probably a slightly more intermediate one, but I did it today in a way that I think even if you're new to Procreate, you could follow along with this as well. I will see you next month.